너는 특별하다. 수많은 사람들의 의심 속에서도 나는 너를 인정했다. 굳건한 정신력과 희생정신, 그것이 내가 너를 선택한 이유이다. 새로운 시대를 열기 위한 나의 뜻에 끝없는 너의 신의가 더해져 마침내 원대한 계획을 이룰 때가 다가오니 진정한 질서를 세우기 위해 움직여라. 믿음직한 나의 기사이다.
모든 것을 바치라. 당신의 뜻을 따르겠습니다.
What is up, guys? This is Kobe here, and welcome to the Baldrix Guide. This guide will be covering specifics for every difficulty in this fight, which is only really 2, so just, normal and hard. There will be attacks and mechanics in this fight that hit or act differently depending on the difficulty. So if there are attacks that do different damage in certain modes, then they'll be labeled in a normal/hard format. Not really too much of an intro needed, so let's go ahead and get right into the standard info. So the entry level requirement for Baldrix is level 290. This is the highest level boss in the game, and even in Korea to this point, there is no other boss with an entry requirement that is this high. Both modes are level 290 with 380% PDR. And the required sacred power that you need for this fight is 700, which is quite a bit for players who have literally just hit level 290. Because the highest you can even get before reaching 290 is 660, and that level 1 Talahard symbol only puts you at 670. I want to say through natural progression, most people that do end up reaching level 290 already meet the gear requirements and the 6 job requirements for normal Baldrix. However, their sacred power is obviously going to be a bit behind. The main ways you want to go about getting enough sacred power for this boss is that you're going to have to level up your event stat whenever there is an event that does give you the current stat. This isn't fully confirmed yet, but I believe Baldrix will make its way into GMS with the new Carcion Octo Festival events, and that event does have sacred power stat. So if you are lacking sacred power, then you can level it up there and get a little bit extra. Unfortunately, Talahard symbols do not have selectors available for it at the moment, so you just need to be really consistent with your daily. So I would say the minimum damage requirements here for this boss will be numbers that go straight from the Maple Scouter, so I strongly recommend you look into it at this point if you haven't already. For normal mode, I would say depending on the party comp, if your Baldrix says around 87 to 92k hexa converted, you are probably strong enough to clear the boss. And then for a hard mode, you need to be probably around 108 to 113k. Hard Baldrix has the second highest boss requirements in this game behind Extreme Calling. The regular standard for hard mode is so high that players on heroic worlds almost certainly have to be level 295 plus if they want to face the boss, so they have the full level advantage. And of course, just like Limbo, the maximum amount of party members is 3 for both normal and hard. Now for the HP values. For normal mode, phase 1 has 2.3Q, phase 2 has 2.5Q, and phase 3 has 4Q. And then going into hard mode, phase 1 is 5.3Q, phase 2 has 2.5Q, and phase 3 has 9.3Q. Hard mode is about 2.2 times higher health than normal Baldrix. Now from Extreme Lotus and Limbo, those bosses had 3 phases and their HP was split into a 30-30-40% format. For Baldrix, for both modes, Phase 1 has about 26%, Phase 2 has 28, and Phase 3 has about 45. Now there's some rounding here and there because obviously those numbers don't add up to 100 total, but it's like around that range. Despite Phase 3 having almost half the health in the fight, I do believe there are still parties that were able to clear Phase 3 or just clear the whole entire boss fight in general with being able to Origin Phase 3 3 times, getting in at that like 12.5 minute mark or so. All phases in this boss can be regular bound except for Phase 2. It is also extremely important to note that for the first 2 phases of this fight, your party will be in completely different rooms fighting bosses by themselves. So there is no party support until Phase 3. There is no entry limit for this boss. You can clear it 1 time per week, and the clear verdict is whenever you defeat Phase 3. And of course, normal and hard, they share the same clear limits. You have a 30-minute time limit, and your life count is 1000 magic erosion with a 10-second potion cooldown. Magic erosion is the life count system in this fight. It starts at 0 and it's shared across all your party members, so if you fail, everybody in the party fails. Very similar to Calling. This number will either go up if you die in general, or if you fail various gauge mechanics in the first 2 phases of the fight. If you die, you gain 200 magic erosion if you are soloing, 100 magic erosion if you're duoing, and 70 magic erosion if you're trioing. And now just a slight brief on the gauge system. I'm going to go over these in more specific details in their own phases, but every phase in this fight has its own gauge, and if you are hit by any pattern through the fight, the gauge increases and a penalty is applied whenever the gauge reaches a certain point. In Phase 1 and 2, the map will change every 2 minutes, and depending on how the gauge looks at that time, your party will gain magic erosion and the gauge will be reset. So with that being said, that's enough for the standard info of Baldrix. Let's go ahead and get right into the fight.
이곳에서 모든 것은 멈추었다. 너희의 저항도 이제는 그저 잿더미가 될 뿐이다.
When you start Phase 1, you'll move to either the Baldrix Servant, aka the Horse, or the Ancient God of Thought. An important detail to note is that where you go will be based on the order in the party UI. The first person moves to Baldrix, the second person moves to the Horse, and the third person moves to the Ancient God. This can be used as a strategy to figure out who in your party should go where at the start of the fight. If you are soloing or duoing the boss, you gain access to a skill that allows you to warp to an area where a party member does not reside. So if you start out the fight as a duo with people fighting Baldrix and the Horse, one person can use his portal to warp to the Ancient God map. You can use NPC chat to open it, and the portal lasts for 10 seconds with a 10-second cooldown. Now let's go ahead and explain the gauge a bit. This is the overflowing magic gauge. This is a party gauge with 3 bars, with each bar consisting of, from left to right, Baldrix, the Horse, and the Ancient God. The gauge value goes up to 1000, with each line being shown for every 250 gauge you obtain. A penalty will be triggered if this gauge goes past 750. If there is a character in the specific boss map, the gauge will decrease by 12 in normal or 10 in hard per second. A boss map with no character in it will have their gauge increased by 8 per second. The gauge of the area you are currently in will be displayed slightly thicker than the other gauges, and the color will appear a tiny bit different. Every 2 minutes, you will be moved by force. All of the gauge will be consumed and reset, and for each gauge that reaches one of the line thresholds, the party will obtain magic erosion. Here is a brief chart based on how much magic erosion you gain with how much gauge you managed to reach before the phase transition happened. For example, if all gauges were to reach 250, the transition would cause the party to gain 60 magic erosion. Now you see that purple area on the gauge? That's where the gauge penalties begin. It starts when the gauge reaches 750. The penalty can immediately be lifted once the gauge falls below 750. However, when the gauge reaches 1000, the penalty is even worse, and it will remain until the map transition occurs. The gauge will also stick at 1000 and will no longer go down at all. So it is very important that you do not get any of these gauges to 1000, or else there will be it's a very bad punishment. When the Baldrix gauge is over 750, the weak point, aka the red crescent shape mark, which also I go into more detail about during his portion of the fight, that is exclusively shown in the Baldrix room, is now shown in all other rooms. When attacking from a direction where the weak point is not shown, you will face a 25% or 30% final damage reduction depending on the difficulty. If this were to be strengthened at 1000, it is a 35% or 40% final damage reduction depending on the difficulty. When the horse's overflowing magic gauge is over 750, an encroached area that exclusively spawns in the horse is now shown in all other rooms. When in this area, you will take 10% damage per second. If this were to be strengthened at 1000 gauge, you take 15% damage per second. And then the Ancient Gods penalty is relatively interesting, because if you hit 750 on here, all party members will take damage when you are hit by the Ancient Gods attacks. So if you are hit by anything that does 50% damage, you will reflect 15% or 20% of that, depending on the difficulty, to your other party members. So your other party members will receive either 7.5 or 10% if you're fighting normal or hard mode. If this were to be strengthened at 1000, party members will receive 25% or 30% of the damage you take, depending on the difficulty. And those are the main things that we have to note about the gauge system. So let's go ahead and start off with Baldrix. You will be facing Baldrix while he is off his horse. The gimmick of this fight is the weak point mechanic that was described above. If there is a visible weak point, you must attack it from the side it is shown on, or else your final damage will be reduced by 25% or 30% depending on the difficulty. And of course, the gauge increases for this portion will only affect the Baldrix bar on the gauge, which is the first one out of the 3. Now for his first attack, Baldrix will summon like a magic circle kind of thing that's facing downwards and send energy into the ground near himself. An attack will then be used on the ground 5 times, starting with a warning, and then explosions occur shortly after. This attack deals 20% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 30 or 45 depending on the difficulty, with the cooldown being 18 or 15 seconds based on the difficulty. Next up, we have the blind side. Baldrix will summon his halberd and then he'll slam it forward after a short period of time. This attack deals 30% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 130 or 180. I'm sure you already know, by difficulty at this point. Right after the slam, lightning will strike from right behind Baldrix. That attack deals 30% damage and increases your magic gauge by 60 or 80 while also blinding you for 3 seconds, and the cooldown is 10 seconds. Next, you have the thrust. Baldrix will summon a claw and attack you after a very short period of time. You can dodge this attack by moving behind him or ducking. This attack deals 40% damage and is a super knockback, while also increasing your magic gauge by 120 or 160. This attack has a cooldown of 10 seconds. Next up, we have the zone. Baldrix will summon a zone around himself and you cannot cancel it with bind. If you leave the zone, it renders the weak point invisible, therefore automatically applying the final damage penalty just right there, which means in order to do full damage to Baldrix, you must fight him inside the zone. 12 seconds after the zone is spawned, Baldrix will raise his hand and then destroy the zone, removing the weak point penalty if you were outside of the zone. The explosion deals 60% or 80% damage and increases the magic gauge by 250 or 350. This attack has a cooldown of 20 seconds. Next up, we have Heavy Rainfall. These are the falling pillar attacks that occur in this map. A preview is shown on the map and then explodes after like a second and a half. It can hit 6 different parts of the map and it's 2 parts every time the ability is used. It is used 4 times every second or so and does not appear in the same spot twice in a row. This attack deals 25% or 35% damage and increases the magic gauge by 70 or 100. You will also receive a debuff on your head for 5 seconds when you are hit. And this is a really bad debuff because it prevents the weak point from being identified. Therefore, if there is a weak point that is currently active, you will receive the final damage penalty. There's about a 10-second cooldown on this attack. And then for our final attack, we have Glory. There are cross-shaped lasers that appear centered around your character, positioned at a 45-degree interval. One laser does not move, while the other rotates after a short delay. And then once the lasers connect, the attack will occur. The attack deals 30% damage and increases your magic gauge by 130 or 180, while also stunning you for 1 second. The circle that spawns around your character is a safe spot, so you technically don't even have to move if you don't have to for when this attack occurs. And that is all you need to know for phase 1 for Baldrix. Next up, we have the Servant, aka Sleipnir, aka the Horse. The Horse can be kind of tough due to a combination of a few things here and there, and he also has some of the most powerful attacks in this phase, so you're going to want to be pretty careful when you fight him. And of course, the magic gauge increases for this portion will only affect the Sleipnir bar in the gauge, which is the second one out of the 3. First attack, we have the front step. Sleipnir raises his foreleg and slams it down after about a second. This attack deals 40% damage and increases your magic gauge by 130 or 180. Following the slam, 2 follow-up attacks will occur while spikes will erupt around Sleipnir and your location. This attack deals 20% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 65 or 90. It has about a 7.5 or a 6 second cooldown. Next up, we have the Blessing of Eternal Sleep. Sleipnir raises his forelegs, and after about 2-ish seconds or so, 17 magic balls will fall from the ceiling. While he raises his leg, a protective shield will form around him that you can stand on to prevent getting hit by the magic balls, or you just stand in. This attack deals 80% or 90% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 80 or 100. It will also inflict a skill lock for 3 seconds. If you are a Dark Sight user, Dark Sight is not going to work against this attack. There is a 15-second cooldown. Next up, we have the Leap. Sleipnir leaps and disappears. An effect will be displayed on your character's location, and after a little bit of time, he will reappear and slam down. This attack deals 90% or 100% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 260 or 350. This attack has a 10-second cooldown. Next up, we have the Barrier, which is similar to meeting the penalty on the gauge, as I mentioned before, but an indicator will appear in each corner and then spawn a barrier after about a second. Getting hit by the barrier creation will deal 90% damage and increase the magic gauge by 200 or 250. Staying in the barrier after it's created will increase your damage taken by 10%. And this barrier lasts for 20 seconds with about a 40-second cooldown. Next up, we have the Orb. An orb will appear somewhere on the map, and it will activate whenever you enter its detection range. And then it explodes after either 0.3 seconds till they enter the attack range again, or after 3.5 seconds by default. Getting hit by this explosion deals 20% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 50 or 80, while also teleporting you to a random location on the map. The orb may spawn on top of you, but you won't automatically be teleported due to it being a 2-part attack, so there will still be time for you to move out of the way before it can detonate on top of you. It has about a 20-second cooldown. Next up, we have the Chains. This attack is very similar to the Chains from Black Mage. You'll be targeted by the blue line and then attack shortly after. There are 5 chains in normal or 6 chains in hard every time this attack occurs. This attack deals 30% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 40 or 60 while also stunning you for 1 second. So you need to be careful because of this 1 second stun. You can get stun locked by this attack. So you either gotta dodge very carefully, or maybe you could use Erosion beforehand so you don't get stunned at all. It has a 15 or a 12-second cooldown. And then we have the same exact heavy rainfall pattern from Baldrix, except instead of a weak point debuff, you just take more damage from this attack. It does 30% or 40% damage instead of 25% or 35%, and it increases the overflowing magic gauge by 70 or 100 with a 10-second cooldown. And that is all for the Horse. Now moving on over to the Ancient God. This room isn't as rough as the other 2 dimensions in my opinion, and the gimmick is really easy but really punishing if you fail, which is with destroying the statues. But like, if I'm gonna be honest, you like really have to try to fail in order to fail that gimmick. Some attacks in this dimension are very tough to dodge, but it's really not that big of a deal because they're like some of the least punishing attacks in the whole phase. And of course, the overflowing magic gauge increases for this portion will only affect the Ancient God bar, which is the last of the 3 on the gauge. First, we have the Cross Laser attack. Cross-shaped warnings appear at random locations on the map and then will attack after about a second. This attack deals 25% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 50 or 75. It has about a 10-second cooldown. Next up, we have Teaching Magic. Magical energy gathers in the center, and after about a second and a half, he attacks in the shape of a cross and an X. 2 separate attacks, but he'll use them both back to back. This attack is not used during the statue possession pattern discussed later. This attack deals 30% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 40 or 50, and it has a 7-second cooldown. Next up we have Concrete Barrage. A portal is created on top of the Ancient God, and then after about a second, a sphere is summoned from the portal and will fire at you 6 times, so 6 different spears. This attack deals 20% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 15 or 20. This attack will also not occur during the Stone Statue Possession pattern, and it has a 12-second cooldown. Now for the Stone Statue Possession pattern, there are 4 different statues in the fight at the top left, the top right, the bottom left, and the bottom right. And one of these 4 statues will be possessed by the Ancient God. During the statue possession phase, the boss in the center will be invincible, and his hitbox will be moved to one of the 4 statues that are currently possessed. The activated statue is highlighted red on the minimap. This pattern has about a 50-second cooldown, so you use it either 2 or maybe very rarely 3 times while you are inside of his dimension for the 2 minutes that you're there for. Our next attack, we have the Stone Pillars, which only the possessed statue can use. The activated stone statue will cast a pattern that causes stone pillars to fall 4 times at almost 1-second intervals around it. They will not fall again at the same location. This attack deals 20% or 25% damage and increases the overflowing magic gauge by 20 or 25 with a 6.5-second cooldown. Next up we have Light of the Magic Mirror. A magical mirror of light fires from the center of the map. It will target your location for 5 seconds and then it will stop and fire after about a second. This attack deals 10% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 35 or 50 while also stunning you for 1 second. You will not get hit by this light if you are standing behind an active statue. In order to clear the stone statue possession pattern, you must have this light hit an activated statue twice. If you fail to clear this pattern within 6 attempts with the light, the stone statue possession will end automatically and your overflowing magic gauge increases by 250. Now for the final thing for the Ancient God phase, we have the Magical Rift. Magical Rifts will appear randomly on the map and it will be marked blue on the minimap. The rift will gradually widen after it has been summoned for 10 seconds and 20 seconds. It will be fully opened after 35 seconds. You have a stack system above your head for the entire Ancient God phase. This number is important because it subtracts from the rifts that you close depending on what level they are at. The 4 rift categories are as follows. On summon, it requires 1 stack to cleanse. After 10 seconds, it requires 2 stacks to cleanse. After 20 seconds, it requires 3 stacks to cleanse, and after 35 seconds, the rift is fully opened and it can no longer be cleansed. You can partially cleanse bigger rifts, bringing them down from 3 stacks to 1 stack if you only have 2 available. If you have 4 in normal or 3 in hard fully opened on the map, all of the rifts will be filled and you will face a penalty of the overflowing magic gauge being increased by 500. So it is important that you keep an eye out on filling the rifts. And that is it for P1. It is still a lot of info, but I'm going to be honest, after some practice, it's really not so bad. But now it's time to move on to phase 2. Baldrix has grown very large by absorbing magical power, and you will have to be fought on 3 different sides. I guess quotations for sides because one of them is center. So center, east, and west. And once again, party members will have to be in their own room. It is also important to note that, as I mentioned before, you cannot regular bind phase 2. Now let's go ahead and talk about phase 2's gauge system. So phase 2's gauge is split into 3 different sections. The first one is also called Overflowing Magic, which is the gauge in the center. This is a personal gauge that only fills based on the attacks that only you are hit by. It goes up to 1000, but it does decrease by 5 or 4 per second. Next we have the Magic Mark gauge, which is the blue gauge on the left. This is a party gauge and its maximum value is based on the number of party members. This gauge is permanent and does not go down for the entire phase. This gauge gains a stack every time your overflowing magic gauge reaches 1000. And then next up we have the overflow gauge, which is the purple gauge on the right. This is a party gauge, and its maximum value is based on the number of party members, just like Magic Mark, and it resets. But this one, instead of it being permanent, it resets every 2 minutes. This gauge gains a stack every time your overflowing magic gauge reaches 1000. Every 2 minutes, there is an animation that occurs, and it is the boss room transition, where party members will swap between certain rooms in this phase. It will take all of the overflow gauge, and you will be given magic erosion, based on the amount of party members and how much overflow there was. I'll display the trio chart first, because most people are going to be doing this in trios. But then if you were concerned, here is the duo chart, and then here is the solo chart. So you do not want to get hit as much as possible, or else you will get that overflow gauge, and that overflow gauge will increase that magic erosion, which does bring your party closer to failing the boss. For the magic mark gauge, a new pattern will be added every time it reaches a certain threshold. And once again, I'm going to be showing the charts for the trio run, and then a duo run, and then a solo run. For the first threshold on the magic mark gauge, patterns from other sides of Baldrix will be added to other parts. So if you are in east, a pattern from west will be added, and vice versa. Though if you are in center, a pattern from the west will be added. If your party reaches the second threshold on the magic mark gauge, a pattern from the center is added to the east and west side, while a pattern from the east side is added to the center. For the final threshold, you completely fill up the gauge. There is no change in phase 2, however, a pattern in phase 3 will be strengthened. If your party is skilled enough to clear phase 2 without any magic marks at all, they will be rewarded. You guys will be rewarded with a beneficial effect in phase 3 that I will describe later. I will say that part is very difficult to do, and even after Baldrix has been out in Korea for over 6 months, my party is still yet to get this special gimmick in phase 3. Now let's go over a few common attacks that you'll see in all rooms of phase 2. First one is the purple magic. How I said all rooms, well, this one literally only appears on the east side by default. However, when that magic threshold does go up off the magic marks, the purple magic can appear in both the west and the center. If you see any attacks in phase 2 that resemble a purple color, you have to face the attack. Failing to do so will result in you taking a certain amount of damage depending on the attack. Next up, we have the overflowing magic gauge. When your overflowing magic gauge reaches 1000, overflowing magic will be created on the ground at your character's location. It will attack 3 times at 2-second intervals. This attack deals 30% or 40% damage and does not increase your overflowing magic gauge at all. Next, we have the magic storm. A storm will spawn on either the east or the west side of Baldrix and will travel through every room in the phase. It will either go from east to center to west, or west to center to east. Due to this, a party member can warn others if the storm spawns in their room first, as it will pass through the other 2 rooms right after. You can even catch a glimpse of what room the storm goes to by looking at the portal that it travels through. If the portal is blank, then the storm pattern has reached its final location and then it is over. You can avoid the storm by ducking. The attack deals 60% or 70% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 600 or 700, and the attack has a 45-second cooldown. And then we have the lightning strikes, in which 4 or 5 lightning strikes appear on the map and then they attack. They deal 30% damage and increase your overflowing magic gauge by 200 or 300, and they have a 5-second cooldown. And that is it for the common attacks. So first, we're going to take a look at the west side, which is apparently considered the most challenging phase of the 3 rooms in phase 2. Our first attack is Soaring Magic. This attack spawns on the ground and tracks your character's location for a certain amount of time. After it stops, an attack occurs after about 1 second. This attack deals 40% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 400 while also launching you into the air. And while you are launched in the air, a second attack will occur in the air that deals 50% or 70% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 500 or 600. It has a 20-second cooldown. Next up, we have the Dimensional Slash. A blue path appears on the map that passes through your character's location. About a second later, a crescent-shaped object will move along that path. This attack deals 40% or 50% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 400 or 500. It has a 20-second cooldown. This also kind of sort of ties to an interesting mechanic in this phase, in which I have literally never really experienced at all, but somehow it does exist. But I feel like in the amount of times I've ran this boss, I have not encountered this, at least like at all, or I've never noticed it. It also literally doesn't even show up in some of the Korean guides, and then one other one that I looked at, it talks about it, but I can't quite explain like what it's trying to say. So I'll be updating the text guide if I get more information on this attack or what this thing does, and you guys can view it there if I ever figure it out. This is a complete guide. I should have this information. This is ridiculous. Next up, we have the Absorbing Magic. A demon-looking thing will spawn in either the left or right corner, dragging the character in. After some time, it will stop pulling and bite you in a wide area. This attack deals 60% or 70% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 600. It has a 27-second cooldown. Next up, we have the Homing Spheres. 3 spheres appear at the top of the map and will fly in a straight line towards you from left to right every almost 2 seconds. They will disappear upon contact with your character, the ground, or after a second and a half. The more spheres you are hit by, the more punishing the attack becomes. If you are hit by 1, it does 20% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 200. If you are hit by 2, it does 40% damage and increases your gauge by 300. If you are hit by 3, it does 50% or 70% damage and increases your magic gauge by 400. It has an 18 or 12 second cooldown. If you reach the first threshold on the magic mark gauge, you will have to face the double attack from the east side. And if you reach the second threshold on the magic mark gauge, you will have to face the flower lasers from the center. Because these attacks will be explained in their own different segments, I'm not going to go over them now. I'll go over them later, and then you can kind of piece it together when you come back to look at the west side patterns. Now we will go over the center, which is apparently the easiest room in phase 2. And that's because the patterns usually do not have too much overlap, but that doesn't mean that they always don't have overlap. Sometimes they definitely do. First up, we have the flower lasers. 10 laser beams appear at various angles, and then they fire in the order they appear after about a second and a half. This attack deals 25% or 30% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 130 or 150, and it has a 20-second cooldown. Next up, we have the concentric circles. Baldrix will spawn circular attacks centered around him at 0.9 second intervals. He will either do this from the inside going out or from the outside going in. This attack deals 35 or 40% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 220 or 250, and it has a 25-second cooldown. Next up, we have Rampant Thunder. Baldrix unleashes thunder by making a sweeping motion with his left hand. It is a 4-part attack. Part 1 through 3 includes a vertical area appearing on your character that will track you for a short time. Once the area becomes fixed, a lightning strike appears after about a second. This attack deals 40 or 45% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 260 or 300. The 4th and final part will display a warning effect on the ground that would then be struck by lightning after nearly 2 seconds. You can dodge it by jumping or just being away from the ground in general. You really have to be like on the ground to get hit by this attack. This attack deals 80% or 90% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 260 or 300. It has about a 40-second cooldown for the whole entire Rampant Thunder attack. And next up, we have Vengeful Spirit, which is just a spirit that randomly appears at the top of the map, and after a while it just explodes into 3 projectiles, flying in all the top, the bottom left, or the bottom right. If you are hit, it deals 40% or 60% damage and does not increase your overflowing magic gauge. It has a 15-second cooldown. Now for the additional patterns from the magic mark gauge, if you reach the first threshold, you have to face the Soaring magic attack from the west side. And if it reaches the second threshold, you have to face the 3 swords attack from the east side. And then for the final room in phase 2, we have the east side. Again, the only room in phase 2 with the purple magic by default. And as a reminder, if you see that purple magic, you must face the attack to avoid taking damage. First up, we have the 3 swords attack. 3 vertical blue or purple zones appear on the map, and a sword will drop on them after 1.5 seconds. This attack deals 40% damage and your overflowing magic gauge is increased by 300. It has a 15-second cooldown. Next up, we have the double attack. This attack consists of 2 vertical purple areas as well as a wide blue area that you have to duck to avoid, but the order in which they appear is random. The attack for each of these occur 1.5 seconds after the warning. This attack deals 50% or 60% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 400 while also inflicting a super knockback. It has a 30-second or a 25-second cooldown. Next up we have the Dimensional Slash, which is similar to the attack on the west side. It's just, in this room, a purple path can also appear, where you have to face the attack. The attack deals 40% or 50% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 400 or 500, and it has a 20-second cooldown. Next up we have the Magic Orb. Either a blue or a purple magic orb will spawn at random. If you get a blue orb, the blue orb will chase after you for a short amount of time, and then will stop and attack after 1 second. This attack deals 50% or 70% damage and increases your overflowing magic gauge by 600 or 700. The purple magic orb will randomly spawn in one location on the map and it does not move. You have roughly about 3 seconds to get inside of the orb before the attack occurs, and it does the same exact damage, but it will also teleport you to a random location. It has a 35-second cooldown, however, there is only a 5-second cooldown after the very first time the skill is used. And then we have the Homing Spheres, which is the exact same attack as from the west. The only difference here really is that the cooldown is the same in both normal and hard mode. I will say though, a good way to dodge these spheres is to stand directly under the one that is about to attack you next. That way it just only makes a downward path and it's super easy to dodge as soon as it starts moving. And then for the additional patterns added from the magic mark gauge, the first threshold, if you meet the first threshold, you get the Dimensional Slash, which it's already in this dimension already. However, you will get 2 that appear at the same time instead of just 1. And then if you meet the second threshold, you get the flower lasers from the center. It's a bit of a messy phase of the fight, really, but honestly, that's just how the phase gets whenever that magic mark gauge goes up way too much, because you just start dealing with so many attacks that weren't supposed to be in that room to begin with, and it becomes just insanely difficult to dodge everything. So you literally have to bring in your A game from the get-go, or else it gets too difficult. And again, you want to try to go for that 0 magic marks so you get that special phase 3 pattern.
인정하지. 넌 나의 적수로서 충분하다. 나는 신왕님의 검, 발드릭스. 그분의 이름 아래 결투를 신청한다.
Here we are in the final phase of Baldrix. Your party can now finally meet up together to take down this final phase. The first thing we need to get into is the gauge system. This is the Squeezing Magic Gauge. This is a personal gauge that immediately begins to increase as soon as you enter the phase. It increases by 6 or 7 per second. And of course, like previous gauges in this fight, it goes up to 1000. When the gauge reaches 300, Baldric's direct attacks will create a purple after image with a slight delay. If it is an attack with multiple parts, the after image will only appear after the final part of the attack. You want to get hit by the after image to decrease your gauge. All attacks from any after image deal 10% damage. When the gauge reaches 600, all after image attacks deal 20% damage and the Squeezing Magic Gauge is reduced even more. When the gauge reaches 1000, it is immediately brought back down to 600 and you will enter the Soul Execution state. In this state, after image attacks only deal 5% damage while also reducing the Squeezing Magic Gauge even more than before. However, all of Baldric's attacks, excluding the map patterns, deal 100% damage. In order to get rid of the Soul Execution state, you must get hit by enough after image attacks to bring the gauge down all the way to 0. It will also be lifted if you die. If you are to reach 1000 gauge while in the Soul Execution state, you will face a true death. It will ignore any use of your invincibility frames or Heaven's Door. Now let's go ahead and get into the Baldric's patterns. Just a heads up though, the amount of Squeezing Magic Gauge that is reduced by being hit by an after image will be displayed in purple. It will also be shown in the following order of what state your gauge is currently in. The values are the same in both normal and hard mode. First up, we have the short charge. Sleipnir will lower his head and then after about 1.3 seconds he will charge a short distance. This attack deals 25% or 30% damage and increases your Squeezing Magic Gauge by 35 or 40 while also being knocked back. The after image for this attack appears after 1.2 seconds. This attack will lower your Squeezing Magic Gauge by 20, 40, or 60. It has a 10-second cooldown. Next up we have the Triple Swing. Baldrix will summon his halberd and swing it 3 times in succession. Similar to Saren's triple attack in the sunset phase, all of these attacks can be avoided by ducking. Between each attack, he would charge towards a player's location. No attack is involved when charging though. The first hit occurs after 1.6 seconds, it deals 40% damage and increases your squeezing magic gauge by 120. The second hit takes 2.3 seconds to charge, dealing the same amount of damage and giving you the same amount of gauge as the first hit. And then the final hit takes 2.8 seconds to charge, dealing 60% damage and increasing your squeezing magic gauge by 150. The after image occurs 1 second after the third hit. This attack will lower your squeezing magic gauge by 100, 130, or 160. It has a 24-second cooldown. Next up we have the double swing. Baldrix will summon his halberd vertically and then swing it forward after 1.6 seconds. After a very short delay, he will decide randomly if he wants to swing it forward again or backwards. This attack deals 30% damage and increases your squeezing magic gauge by 70 or 80 while knocking you back on the second attack. The after image appears about 1.3 seconds after the front attack or 1.2 after the back. And that attack will lower your squeezing magic gauge by 40, 65, or 90. It has a 12-second cooldown. Next up we have the dash. Sleipnir will bow his head slightly while a stopping point appears in front of him. A little bit later, he will dash at that point. The attack will only occur when he stops, and you can also dodge the attack by jumping up a decent bit. Of course, you gotta use some type of up jump though. This attack deals 25% or 35% damage and increases your squeezing magic gauge by 50 or 60 while also knocking you back. The after image appears 1.2 seconds after the attack ends. That attack will lower your squeezing magic gauge by 30, 55, or 80. It has a 20-second cooldown. Next up we have the portal. Baldrix will summon a portal in the center and Baldrix will rush into it. Shortly after, smoke will be coming out of the portal in the direction that Baldrix will emerge from, so either left or right, and then he will rush towards the very end of that side. That attack deals 50% or 60% damage and increases your squeezing magic gauge by 130 or 150. The after image appears about 1.1 seconds after the portal disappears, and that attack will lower your squeezing magic gauge by 60, 90, or 120. It has a 35-second cooldown, but a 20-second cooldown after the very first use. It is important to note that as Baldrix enters this portal, he will be invincible. So you want to make sure that, you know, all your burst damage is done while he's bind, or just most of what you could do while he's bound, or else you'll lose that damage or a good chunk of that damage once he goes into this portal. Next up we have Triad Thunder. Baldrix will show a symbol on his hand while creating a magic area nearby. The symbol on his hand and the magic area will glow either blue or purple. An attack will occur after about 0.66 seconds. If the symbol glows blue, you must avoid the thunder. If it glows purple, you must approach the thunder. This attack deals 70% damage and increases your squeezing magic gauge by 45. There are 4 different variations of what colors he will use for this attack. We have purple, blue, purple, 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 blue, blue, purple, purple, or blue, purple, blue. And that's it. The after image will be created one time at the very end. That attack reduces your squeezing magic gauge by 30, 35, or 45. It has a 50-second cooldown, but only a 15-second cooldown after the first use. Next up we have the zone, which is similar to the same zone in phase 1. Baldrix will summon a storm, and then will cast the zone shortly after. The zone lasts about 12 seconds. If you move outside the zone into the raging storm, you will take 10% continuous damage and your squeezing magic gauge increases by 12 or 15. If the magic mark gauge reached the final strengthening stage in phase 2, the squeezing magic gauge increases by 16 or 22 per tick instead. You will also be inflicted with a darkness status effect from 1.2 seconds that is not affected by status resistance skills and cannot be blocked by status defense skills. At the end, Baldrix will raise his hand to detonate the zone after 1.8 seconds. This attack deals 80% or 90% damage and increases your squeezing magic gauge by 100. It has a 50-second cooldown, but a 20-second cooldown after the first use. And then for our final attack, Ragnarok. The skill is used every 2 minutes. A 5-second warning appears before the skill is used and the background music fades out. Attacks like Triple Swing, Triad Thunder, and Zone will not be used around 10 to 20 seconds before Ragnarok is used. This is his ultimate attack, and there's like the loudest sound effect whenever he does it. However, it doesn't do any damage at all. The catch is though, is that it increases everybody's squeezing magic gauge by 300, and also during this attack, he is completely invincible. If your party managed to clear phase 2 without accumulating a single magic mark, a shield will appear on your character, and your squeezing magic gauge won't increase at all. Therefore, the Ragnarok attack does completely nothing. So while not necessary to have that shield, it does help a little bit. Now for the map patterns, even though there's only 2. It is important to note that the soul execution state will not change the damage of any of these skills, so do not fret. Fun fact, they actually did on the test server when the boss first came out, which is ridiculous. First up, we have the Magic Crystal. A random character will be targeted for 3.5 seconds, and then afterwards the crystal locks onto that character's location for 1 second and then falls into the floor. This attack deals 20% damage and increases your squeezing magic gauge by 15. Magic crystals will remain on the map. Characters who make contact with the planted crystal will take 5% damage and increase your squeezing magic gauge by 5. Magic crystals can be destroyed under the following conditions. 1. The party deals a certain amount of damage to Baldrix. 2. When another magic crystal falls, the currently existing one will disappear. And 3. If you drop a new crystal near an existing one, both crystals will be destroyed. It has a 15-second cooldown with a 12-second cooldown after the first use. And then we have Blooming Magic. 3 flowers will grow on the map, and then they will bloom after about 2 seconds, which will attack you for 20% or 25% damage. This will then be followed by stems growing on both sides of the flower after 1.6 seconds, which will attack you for 30% or 35% damage, and increase your squeezing magic gauge by 15 or 25, as well as applying the slow status effect for 2 seconds. You can dodge the bloom by standing right beside the flower, and then moving to the bloom's location to dodge the stems, as the stems do not attack in the same spot as the bloom. It has a 14-second cooldown, but a 10-second cooldown after the first use. As you defeat Baldrix, Sleipnir disappears, and Baldrix will fall and kneel before you while covering his face with his left hand. Honestly, this is it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of things that I go over in these bosses, and the funny part is, the bosses themselves aren't inherently that difficult. At least in my personal experience, normal Baldrix hasn't really been too bad, and you can get the hang of it very quickly. It's harder than Limbo, but that's a really low bar. That's a really low bar. Unfortunately, because I'm too weak, I have no say on how tough hard Baldrix will be, but I would definitely want to go into hard Baldrix on my A game, but not underestimate how he is at all. Now for the rewards. Baldrix drops all of the main things that all the other bosses drop, all the regular stuff, but the main item is for the eternal pieces, the Trace of Eternal Loyalty. You need 10 of these to be able to create eternal gloves, shoes, or cape, the same exact eternals as Limbo. You get 1 of them from normal mode, or 2 of them from hard mode. Next up we have the Baldrix Roid, which drops from normal and hard. Honestly, this is one of the bigger androids in the game. It's not life size, like phase 3 life size, but it is pretty big. Baldrix also has its own eternal armor box, which can be used to immediately claim the Eternals from this boss. However, I imagine the drop rate is probably abysmally low, and you probably won't see one for a very long time. And a couple new things I like to bring up is that this boss drops the new Boss Ring Box of Life, which has a chance to obtain a Grindstone. And if we go by the rates in Korea, there is about a 14.5% chance to get a Grindstone. If GMS properly adjusts the rates for Heroic Worlds and gets rid of all weapon jump rings for other stats and stuff, if you only have to worry about 1 weapon jump ring, you have an 18% chance to hit a Grindstone of Life. He also drops the new Grindstone, the Grindstone of Faith, which is the Grindstone that gets rings from level 5 to level 6, in both normal and hard. And you can also get the ring box from normal and hard as well. And then his main drop, the big ticket drop, is the Oath of Death. It is the new level 250 pendant that is part of the Brilliant boss set. If you pair it up with the Limbo ring for the 2 set effect, you get an additional 20 all stat, 500 HP, 20 attack, and 15% boss damage. It's already tough enough as is to clear hard Baldrix, but these Brilliant items have extremely, insanely low drop rates, so it'd be really hard to expect one. but I wish you the best of luck. And then now for a soul weapon, it's just a regular soul. If you like the look of it, it's cool, but we got the regular soul, which is just one attack, you summon out Baldrix, and then he does a powerful blow, and it hits for a pretty decent amount of damage. Or we have the max soul, which is a 2-minute summon that deals a bit of damage, that has a 150-second cooldown, and that's pretty much it. I've looked back to see if these soul summons have changed in damage, and they really haven't. And then they've also kept like the same like really terrible formula for soul summons, so they don't really do any damage at all. It's just if you really like the look. And I'm gonna be honest, the Mag Baldrix does look pretty damn good. And that is it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another boss guide. I appreciate you watching the whole thing if you did. Of course, I'm gonna give my credits where credit is due at the very end, as we have them all roll out. And that's pretty much it. My next boss guide will be for the first adversary, probably sometime in the winter, as the boss approaches for, you know, a GMS and MapleStory release. And I'll make sure I'll prepare you guys for that around that time. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.